subtract those out, there's still something like 10% of the cases being filed in a federal courthouse are being filed by pro se plaintiffs. So again, these are individuals not being represented by a lawyer. And so in a system of justice that sort of depends on the adversarial process to really refine a case to help us find justice, it's worth asking the question whether we're finding justice if we don't have individuals representing these plaintiffs. And then beyond just the pro ses, you also have, similar to what I was referring to with some of the defense lawyers, some individuals who just have suffered from a lack of training, at least as compared to their more well-funded counterparts, certainly as compared to what I would expect at a Foley and Lardner associate or associate at a similarly resourced law firm. And sometimes, you see it right away. As a judge, often one of the first things that I'm doing, my first introduction to the case, is reading the complaint. And when I read the complaint, it either might be because I'm preparing for the initial scheduling call, or it might be because a motion to dismiss has been filed, and so I'm reading it in that context. I read the complaint, that's my first introduction to the lawyer, to the case, the plaintiff. It gives me my sense of what this case is. And you can tell, 10 times out of 10, the quality of the attorney by how that complaint is presented. Again, it's the very first document you're seeing. Sometimes it might be the obvious things like, typos and the margins are weird looking and things like that. But sometimes, again, it's just about how they present the case. Often, particularly when you're talking about employment discrimination type cases, which is one of the cases we see most frequently, the 1983 civil rights cases, which are the cases often where an individual is claiming they've been assaulted by police officers. There are often cases that I see where I'm sitting around with my law clerks and we're sort of working through the complaint. We're like, I feel like there's something here. I feel like there's something here, but it's just not being presented. It's not being put together in a way that I can see it. And so it makes it hard for the judge, regardless of your point of view, whether you're a judge who's inclined to believe that, certainly that could be an entirely different discussion going to diversity on the bench. But whether you're a judge who's inclined to believe that certain things happen in the world, or you're a judge who's not inclined to believe that, it's helpful when it's presented to you in a compelling way. And so the same case, the same facts, being presented by a lawyer who's been well-trained on how to present a complaint, who's well-trained on how to argue and articulate a case in court, who's well-trained in how to investigate, can be viewed one way with that kind of lawyer and come across very differently with a different type of lawyer. And so it's essential, again, to have lawyers who are better trained, better resourced, and are able to articulate those cases. It makes a difference on a micro level as to everybody's individual case. It also makes a difference on what I'll refer to as a macro level, which is how the law is developed. And in that regard, there's an article, I make my law clerks read it. I recommend it, even if it's remotely relevant to what I'm talking about. It's called Loser's Rules. It was written by a now former judge who's become a friend of mine, Nancy Gertner. I want to say she was a judge in Massachusetts. But Nancy Gertner's The Loser's Rules. I think it's an important article. I think it was I want to say it was in the Yale Law Journal, but you can find it by her name in the title. And the idea, the theory there, is that the law has developed in a one-sided way. That the law, and particularly she focuses on the issue of employment discrimination, has developed in a way where it's created all of these losers rules, right? All of these rules that indicate why someone's claim should be dismissed, right? And if anybody here has any, and I know some of you do, have any experience dealing with employment cases, you know, if you start pulling cases, you start reading cases, for every case where a judge has taken the time to articulate why a plaintiff should win, there are 50 cases that articulate why they should lose. And some of the rules are, frankly, and I've said it in kind ways in writing, are ridiculous. Some of the things where courts have said this case should be dismissed because if a defendant's able to show this, then the case should be dismissed. And some of them when you really start to look underneath the hood, they don't hold up. They will be issues that, the Supreme Court said X, and then a judge later down the road sort of just tweaked that a little bit, and another judge does the same, and the next thing you know, what actually started out as either what the statute says or the Supreme Court says has turned into something completely divorced from that. Now, there are a number of reasons that happens, but one of them is the sophistication of defense lawyers. And defense lawyers going into court and arguing these things and saying, let's push the law, Your Honor, let's push the law. They're not saying it like that, but that's effectively what they're doing. And they're pushing the law in one direction. And when you don't have plaintiff lawyers on the other side equally as sophisticated, then there's no one to give that counterbalance and say, no, Your Honor, let's pull the law back this way. That's not what the Supreme Court said here. Let's really look at what this case was about and compare that to our case. And we can really start to see why this case is nothing like that. Our case is different from that. So to the extent that the Supreme Court, and maybe these other cases decided incorrectly, have said that a case like this shouldn't go forward, no, let's really look under that and see. We have defense lawyers who are spending a lot of time with their 15 associates looking at these cases, reading every case that's ever been written. And we don't have that on the plaintiff's side, so what happens? The law develops in a one-sided way. So now it's not just a micro issue where you're dealing with having a bad lawyer in your case. Now you're dealing with a bad lawyer in your case, and you're dealing with a body of law that's been developed in a one-sided fashion. And so that's I don't want to take credit for that theory. That's Judge Gertner, but I certainly commend that to you. It's actually even changed, or I shouldn't say changed, adjusted how I look at cases, because you just have to be mindful of seeing it from both sides. But it's harder for the judge. I mean, I currently have 260 civil cases, in addition to 40-something criminal cases. And as much as I might want to say to my law clerks, and we do try really hard to do this, spend an inordinate amount of time on every case, because every case is important. We really do. That's our goal. But the reality is, the better the presentation is, the easier, we're human beings, the easier it is to get to where that lawyer is trying to get you. And so it's just so critical to have strong lawyers on both sides, making the presentation, making that push and pull, so that the lawyering is developed in an even-handed way. The last point, Yolanda had asked me, for small law firm examples of law firms doing good work. There are a number of them out there, and so I do want to be clear about that. What you see in the ones that are good is they tend to be law firms, even small law firms, who have resources, and that ends up being the key. I mean, one that just pops to mind, because it's one certainly in Maryland, in the Baltimore area, the Murphy firm, Murphy, Falcon, Murphy. And I have to be careful. I'm not really supposed to necessarily recommend lawyers to you or not, but just as an example, I mean, there are lawyers that handled the Freddie Gray case. I use them from the civil side. I'll use them as an example for this reason. Part of what makes a successful small law firm is, again, having resources and just having talented lawyers. And so, for those of you, again, if you're in Baltimore, you surely know him, Billy Murphy, one of the most successful civil lawyers that are out there. And so he starts a firm rather than joining with, Foley. He decides to start his own firm, his own practice, and his son is now the managing partner. It's a very successful firm. So you do see there are firms like that out there. Those firms do exist. And again, I want to be careful. This is me now, the sort of judge kicking in the back of my mind. I'm not recommending them to anybody. I'm not saying they do good work, bad work. Just an example of a prominent small firm. And there are small firms like that that are doing important work in a variety of places. And so I'll leave it at that. There's a lot I can say about Billy, but I'll leave it at that. And so really that's sort of an overview of sort of my view on the issue of sort of small practices, the need to sort of fill a role. Again, I think both in the criminal sense and the civil sense, there's a vacuum. And so anything that we can do to fill that vacuum, I think, is useful and worth doing. And so I commend Yolanda and all of you who are here in support for the work you're doing in that space. So I've got a couple minutes if anybody has a question. If not, then I'll just get out of your way.
Judge Hazel, I have a question. What would you say are the qualities that make a good solo small practitioner? Is it more experience? Is it more resources beyond, say, money? What are the things?
I would say training / experience. I think those two go together because, I mean, there's training in the sense of mentoring and having somebody to